newspaper directory. It's a directory of daily and weekly papers, news services, and syndicates.
Jewish have been like in different parts of the world. Sig will talk to us today because his experience encompasses two different lands and a very unusual community called Ligonier, Indiana. So Sig, we're appreciative of your coming today and sharing with us your knowledge, your experience, and your knowledge of Ligonier.
I was very surprised to come here. I've got some people who lived in Ligonier years ago, but so they can keep me straight on this subject here. We came over in 1938, and I had an uncle who was living in Ligonier at the time. He had a department store there, and at that time I was 5 years old. I had a twin brother, and my folks came over, and it was pretty hard living there for a while. My father had a job in as a janitor. He couldn't speak English, and so we lived upstairs in on top of the store, in 2 or 3 bedroom, 2 or 3 room apartment, and it was quite a struggle. But after a while, my father, which was fortunate, we lived in Ligonier, was near an Amish community, and the Amish people there spoke German, so he could converse with them, and so he worked in the factory there for a year or two. Then he bought a car and went out and started buying cattle in the community. And I had an uncle there had a dry goods store, and at that time there were probably 15 Jewish families there, which had declined from a high population in the probably early 1900s of 200, which is amazing.
Families or people?
Families. No, people at that time. There were, but well, it's just a town of maybe 1,500 at that time. So it has quite a history of. We grew up in Ligonier. We lived in town for 8 or 10 years. Then my father bought a farm on the edge of town, and we moved there. And he was in the cattle business, and I helped him with the cows and with the farming, and all along the Jewish community was declining. We had a temple there, which was built in early 1889, early 1900s. And when we got there, they just had services on the holidays. But at one time, that was quite an area in the probably 1900s when there were, I would say, quite a few Jews, close to 200 Jews living there, and they.
Would it help if we start passing material that he's taking from Chopin?
Yeah, but they're later on this.
Okay. It's hard to read it at the end.
Yes.
So life, when I was there, it seemed rather dull compared to the earlier years when there was quite a Jewish community, and they were very active in businesses. What started in the 1850s when 2 Jews, one named Frederick William Strauss, the other Solomon Meyer, they were peddlers and going through the country, and which quite a few Jews did at that time. And this Frederick Strauss, he lived in New York for a short time, but he didn't like it, and so he went out peddling, and so they came to a small town of Auburn, Indiana, and they kind of worked for a fellow there that had a general store, and they heard that he told them that Ligonier was going to prosper. There was a railroad coming through, and so he suggested perhaps they would go there. And so they went to Ligonier and peddled there for a while, and they Strauss opened up a general store there, and it was very successful. And then at the same time, Solomon Meyer opened up one too. So, but one did, the other did, and they worked together for several years, and then they developed an argument, and they just went out on their own, and they established themselves. But they were they must have been pretty brilliant fellows, because the way things went, in a very short time, they after their opened a store, they got into the banking business, and one opened a bank, then the other one opened a bank, and then they started in the land business, and they were very large in the wool business. They had tremendous buildings there to store wool in, and they as they were doing this, they were bringing cousins over from Germany all the time, different people, and that's why it grew so large in to be quite a Jewish community in such a short time, because they were bringing relatives over. As their businesses prospered, they started new things, and then the relatives started new businesses, and Ligonier was really booming. I mean, if you go there, they've got a sign out as you drive into Ligonier that mentions the Jewish community, and they're very proud of that fact. Especially when we came there in 1938, it was still quite a thing, but right now, things have changed a lot, and they've kind of forgotten quite a bit of what the Jews brought there, the people today. But the old timers, they were really appreciative of the businesses and the attitudes of the Jews that came there. They were pretty brilliant people, and they opened up. Just think of it, in 100 years, in a period of 100 years, when they came there, from 1850 to 1950, they built factories, and they came to Chicago and opened American National Bank here, and that's why the older ones moved here to, after being in Ligonier for maybe 30 years, they came to Chicago and opened up some businesses here. And then after they did that, they must have missed Ligonier quite a bit, because Frederick Strauss moved back to Ligonier and built a home there. And there's some beautiful homes there. I don't know if many of you have ever been there, but
The pictures are in the book.
well, the pictures, yeah,
Here, I'll pass another book around from the other end. Here.
And an amazing thing about the citizens, well, we came there in '38, and most of the talented Jews had already died or gone, you know, and but there was a few of them there yet. The Strausses that were still there, and
Who originally started Kingtown people?
well, in the 1850s, these two Jews came there, but there was a population of 300 at the time.
But I mean, who was there before after the Indians?
It's in that
Oh,
book.
I'm here.
Well, there was probably quite a few.
Here it's 1813. Okay. Oh, he's from Ligonier, Pennsylvania.
Maybe we can
I might have known.
hold
That's
the
how-
questions till after, so we can.
Well, that's how the name came, Ligonier. In 1835, a man by the name of Cabin, who lived in Ligonier, Pennsylvania,
I wondered
started
why
the
it
town,
rang a
and
bell.
he named it Ligonier,
Yeah.
Indiana. That's
But these Jews hadn't come there, Ligonier wouldn't amount to anything, really. Well, when they came there, it was 300 population, and in 20 years, it grew to 2,000. So, you know, someone had to bring the people there, and they brought a lot of business. They had 4 banks there at one time in that small community. And then they had established banks in other towns. There were banks in maybe 15 towns that they had started. And they came here and established American National Bank in Chicago. So they have quite a history there. But then you go there to Ligonier today, and it really seems like nothing happened there because there isn't a Jew left. But they have a large cemetery, and the temple is a museum, which makes it very interesting there. I mean, they reserve the Jews very highly there, because they brought a lot of business and culture to Ligonier, which was that, you know, in the early 1850s, come on, there was nothing there really. But manufactured there, the Strausses and the Myers. And when I came there, they were, some of the Strausses still left there, but they lived in the big homes and everything, but their business ventures weren't that successful, the younger ones. And the Myers did very well. And if you go there today, their homes are still kept up, and it's quite an impressive area. Well, they lived in Ligonier for a while. And
I just saw that issue, Durbin Meyer.
oh, I'm sure.
Was the last one. He just died a few years
Right.
ago.
Mhm.
But he's been here all this time.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Ligonier, Pennsylvania was also named after Ligonier in Germany, a spa, right?
That's
what we were told.
interesting.
We were told also that the Jewish people that came in that had the banks financed the farmers around there.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing, too.
Sure, everything. And they opened up carriage factories, and at one time they manufactured automobiles there too. And if you go there today, the factory they were working on is empty. And, you know, it seems sad that the businesses have declined so much. They still have a garment factory there in Ligonier. I go there occasionally. They have auctions out there, and I go in that area occasionally.
Is the mill still operating?
The what?
The mill.
The mill, sure. It's very big there.
Essex Wire used to be in there.
They're closed now. Yeah.
They're closed.
But we lived on a farm just west and then a mile south of Ligonier. My father was in the cattle business there, so I milked cows and took care of things. Yeah, do you have a question?
No, we went this summer, because we had heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we went for a specific reason of seeing the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really very interesting, but we couldn't, first we got lost, so we stopped to the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
And the chief was speaking to me, and he said to me, the street you run on, this is where all the wealthy Jewish people live. The homes,
Yeah, right
they're
back.
old and gorgeous.
Yeah, right back to the fire
And then
department.
2 blocks down was the synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was closed in 1954, the last service was in September
Mm-hmm.
of 54, and now in 1989, it was made a historical
Museum.
museum,
Mhm.
yes. And then we went, he told us where the cemetery was, and Sal took pictures of the,
Yeah, they have 2 mausoleums there.
The Strauss.
Mm-hmm.
Tell them about the stained glass.
Yeah, they're
in
cousins
the-
of mine.
they're in the-
Did you see the stained glass?
Oh, I go there all the time, yeah.
Oh, was it gorgeous?
It's in these pictures that are being passed around, the cemetery, the synagogue, everything. It's in there, it'll get to you.
I mean, they're, if you go to Ligonier, they're rather proud of the Jewish history that came out of there, and that doesn't happen in many towns, I believe. You know, they appreciate that so much, what the Jews really did for the town, because if they wouldn't have arrived, it probably would be a town of 700-800 today.
There's only like 3,000.
Well, they have quite a bit of industry there right now. It's a very growthy community, and they're doing a lot of construction there.
You know, and the largest area of potential immigration, Hispanics.
Oh, yeah, and they're having their problems with the
They're not
Spanish.
happy with it.
No,
Let me
but
know that.
they have to have workers there, so. Well, when we arrived in Ligonier, well, it was quite a struggle just to get along there for my folks, and we went to school there. It was very difficult because I came from Germany and I didn't know English, and I had to go to school and learn English at the same time, and there was some anti-Semitism there yet too in certain areas, you know, which was built up probably not during a time where there was a lot of prosperity, but after things got a little tough there, you could feel it there, and even they had a Ku Klux Klan there when we were there. So. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wasn't all that whole area is.
Yeah, well, northern Indiana was very predominant.
You see, that's one of the more anomalous aspects of the situation. Given the location and given that kind of heritage,
Yeah.
with the clan unit and so on and so forth, the Hawaiian community would be interested not only in supporting its Jewish heritage, but truly embracing it.
They did
You know,
embrace it.
with
yeah.
signs that enter and leave the
Well,
community.
they knew the Jews made the community. I mean,
Identifying them.
right. I mean, they. I doubt if that would ever happen again, where Jews. Well, they came from Germany, from the same area that I was born in. I came from near Trier, Germany, and they came a little north of that, and they're like the Strauss family was very poor in Germany. I mean, and that's why they left, because they couldn't do anything there. The things were against them all the time. So a lot of the younger Jews left and came to the United States and worked hard. But these fellows here really hit a gold mine when it came to Ligonier, because it was just waiting for them. And
You
yeah.
know what was so interesting in the cemetery? Every headstone told where the person
Yeah.
was born.
Mm.
You don't see that anymore, where the person was born. And it told exactly where it was.
And most of them probably came from a certain section of Germany where all the cousins, they brought everybody over. After they got business going, they just kept bringing people over and expanding. And it was something. Then all of a sudden, the younger ones started moving out in the 1920s, the 1930s. They'd come to Chicago, and it just started dying. Community. A few families moved out there from Chicago. One had a junkyard, which wasn't too successful, but not many people, Jews moved in there after after we got there. There just wasn't much. In fact, when I had to go to South Bend to get the training for bar mitzvah, and the temple was just open maybe on the holidays. They bring student rabbis in from Cincinnati for the holidays, and so I wish I could have been there earlier, because I think that was very interesting when things were thriving there instead of when things were on the decline, you know.
Did the early German immigrants, did they stick pretty much to the German language, or did they make a good effort?
No,
speaking English?
they learned English very fast.
Because you mentioned the fact that they were surrounded by the Amish, or
Yeah.
the people who were...
When we came there,
When
they were
he
there.
came in
I'm not sure
38.
if they were there when the Strausses came there at that time, by the Myers. But no, they learned English pretty fast, and they got assimilated. You know, yet they kept their religion. They said on Friday night, on Saturday, all the businesses were closed, which in America it seems strange, because all the Jews closed their business on Saturday and went to temple, and that gained the respect of the townspeople too, because they respected that part of their lives. Yeah.
Sig, do you know what brought your uncle there? Do you know
Yeah, he came in the 1920s, and we had some relatives there. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. His name was Irwin Jacobs. He had a mortgage company in Chicago here, but it's closed now.
Let's go back further. Can I answer this? Because I do the genealogy. Frederick Strauss is actually Sig's great-great-granduncle. In other words, his sister was Sig's great-great-grandmother. It's a direct descendancy. And they're the ones that came over. I have done a chart. It's really Sig's relatives he's talking about when he mentions the Strausses. They are his family. And from the Strausses came the Baums, the Jacobs, and the Kahns. And his uncle was there after the heyday, but he was brought there because other relatives were there before him, which they constantly did. And Ligonier brought other people over.
Before the First World War.
This was earlier than that.
Oh.
I'll pass around some of these things. Sorry.
Sig, who maintains the places now, like the synagogue, which museum, and the cemeteries?
Well, That's
Locally or-
the synagogue is maintained as a museum,
Local
the
people.
town keeps that. And there's how many, 200 graves out there?
Least.
And that's maintained, they set up a program and maintained by the cemetery.
But not other Jewish communities,
No, there aren't any other Jewish. Closest one
Well,
was
South Bend, right?
South Bend or Fort Wayne.
How long did you live there? Did you live?
I lived there from 1938 to 1951. I went to school, I started first grade there, and I graduated high school.
You learned your English.
So when you were a teenager, and did you just get together socially with the other Jewish kids, or were
There
you
weren't any other Jewish kids there.
You were the only, you and
No,
your brother?
There were another family there was the Barsh family. They had a dry goods store there. And he had 2 sons. And then there was a girl there, Harris. She was half Jewish. But my senior class was just 18 children, graduating class. And that's history.
That's history, you're right.
Yeah.
And Indiana is so tied up with basketball that every male was on the basketball team, no matter how short.
How old were you?
Five. I started first grade, right? It was really pretty good.
So
Bring
when,
their families over
Huh?
because, did they bring their families over to work for them? Or
No.
did they bring them over because they wanted to bring their family?
No, we left because in 1938 we kind of had to leave.
No, earlier, Frederick
Earlier?
Strauss.
Did they bring their families because they wanted
Yeah,
people they could trust working for them?
that's right.
In
Well,
the businesses?
well,
Or
things-
was it more so, that they did it out of the kindness of their heart because they wanted?
No, they were
to bring their
expanding so
families
fast
over?
there that they had to have some help, and they could rely on these people more than they could the local. And there weren't that many local people neither, just 300 population at the time. So they brought a lot of family over.
Is there any sociability amongst different communities, different towns that Sig up and Everett now?
Not really.
You were not.
They had quite a social thing going there in around 1900. That was quite a Jewish community. They had 200 people there. Yeah, 200 Jewish.
It was really not an isolated community because there were other smaller towns in Indiana who had Jewish, because I had grand uncles who lived in one was Muncie,
Oh, Montana's quite a way south.
and
Henry, this was isolated. The closest towns
South
were
Bend or Fort
50
Wayne.
miles away. That's where the
And
next
at that time
cities
it was
were.
hard to travel.
oh yeah.
South Bend or Fort Wayne.
No, but because people that had in these towns that established themselves, let their family come over. That's why.
But their businesses, that's why they brought so many over. They just kept increasing and increasing. They could bring more cousins over. Or mostly they brought relatives over for Germany.
Yeah.
Then they went into business themselves, different businesses.
Can I mention something? The Indiana Jewish Historical Society in Fort Wayne has done quite an extensive history of Ligonier. This is a letter that was sent to me in 1982. There's a little blue book going around that was published which really tells the story, but here it tells a little bit about the history. I mean, there is so much on Ligonier. I think the important thing is that the town prospered from the first Jews, and there are many older Jews still there who, when we go there, they just hug us and kiss us and can't, I mean, they don't want to let Sig go.
The older people.
The older people.
not
The older
Jews, not Jews. They're
the
not
older
Jewish.
people.
No. Yeah, if you go there to some function, I mean, they really
They have
all over you.
They have an annual high school reunion of all classes.
Did you say there are older Jewish people there?
No.
No, there are no Jews.
No
The
Jews.
last one, Durbin Meyer, died in, I think, 71. He was a descendant of Solomon Meyer. And my husband's, there's something going around about who is buried in the Jewish cemetery. Both my husband's grandfather, who came over in 38 but died at Ellis Island or even on the boat in Manhattan, and my husband's father, who died in 1955, is buried there, and so are a lot of other ancestors.
I mean, the cemeteries are very interesting because of the families you
Who
can
maintains
follow.
it?
It's maintained, by the Cemetery Association there, they were given quite a bit of money, and that was invested, and that pays for the maintaining of it. But I go there quite a bit. I'm about the only one that checks up on them, and you have to call them once in a while to get things done. You know, sometimes they're neglectful, and so I give them a call. I go there about twice a month. I go through the cemetery. But I hate to see what goes on after I'm gone. There's nobody going to be going through there. But it's a beautiful cemetery, and the names are very interesting. If you're in a location near there, it'd be very interesting to go to Ligonier because it's the homes are beautiful and the streets are nice, and I mean, they're proud of this.
Is the cemetery accessible at all times?
You drive right. First
yeah.
thing you hit.
You don't have to have a gate to open?
No,
No.
you can drive right.
I'd like it.
The Jewish cemetery is in the back of the
North end.
North end of the cemetery, and
It's a Jewish section, and I
yeah,
should
they've got 2 mausoleums there, and it's very interesting.
Someone mentioned the mausoleums. They're all in marble. These were wealthy families. Stained glass windows with a J for Jacobs and an S for Strauss on 2 different ones. They're in the pictures in the book, but it's unbelievable.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a picture that I took, or that we took, I should say, of a Jewish person buried there that was born in Jamaica in 1883. The picture's wandering around the
Yeah.
place.
They've got all the dates there on the stone. It's interesting.
If anyone is interested in going and would like to see the inside of the synagogue, which is now a museum, you can only go Monday through Friday from 9 to 3.
That's worth.
Excuse me, we went on a weekend. We made special arrangements with a whole tour of us. I got a busload together.
Oh, really?
No, the Chicago Historical Society got a busload together. It's also in your material. They did a tour. There were 44 people on the bus, and they opened everything up for us. The museum, the homes. We got into the old Strauss and Meyer and Jacobs mansions.
Nobody's living there now?
Oh, yeah.
They're bed and breakfast. Lee could tell you. Lee could tell you.
Bed and breakfast, we saw them, yes.
They are absolutely fantastic. I mean, you can't imagine the hand carving, the stained glass, the parquet design floors. And I urge everyone, if they go there to stay overnight, it's $40 a night or $45 with breakfast.
It's a beautiful home. No, one person.
Do you know if it's only a group, like if we made arrangements, would they show the 3 of us through? Or they only go in groups?
I'm not sure. You probably have to call ahead, but I presume it'd go in groups. You know, I don't know. I mean, only time you can go there is a weekend, perhaps. Yeah.
Sunday, well, yeah.
But if let's say 20 of us wanted to go, we could arrange, I mean, we know people there, they know us. We could arrange a tour, but it would be best to be done during the summertime when the weather
No,
is
I
good.
realize that.
And that's what we did for our, we've been there twice on tours.
How far is it from here?
About 130 miles.
Takes
Right
about
on
2
Route
hours.
6, right on Route 6, but you can take the toll road and get off on 20 and take the 20 down.
Is it on 6?
Right on Route 6.
That's where
Corner of
nothing is on there.
That's right. It's
You
just
go-
about 30 miles east of that.
Oh, that's all? Napanee.
Yeah, a lot of people go to Napanee, visit the Amish community.
Yeah.
Sig, is there, at present time, is there something that you would say is a town center? Is there something like a main street with a restaurant or?
Oh, yeah, it's got a main street. I mean,
In the
there's
pictures.
pictures coming around.
There's nothing much.
Dave, what's the population today?
I
We
think
opened
around
on
3,000.
Sunday and everything's closed on Sunday.
But it has quite a bit of industry.
Surrounding areas.
But see, it's like you said, Amish is like us. Oh, yeah. We
farm-
were told to go to a
farm soup.
restaurant and we got off the
Henry,
phone.
what
Well,
is
yeah,
it?
several people tell us about this restaurant that was so good. And it's
Yes?
closed because of the Amish. It was on Sunday.
Can I ask you a short question about before you came to Ligonier in Germany?
But I was 5 years old, remember when I came.
Okay, comparing what you remember from your experiences. I forgot you were 5.
Yeah, I don't remember that much.
Okay.
I
But
can't-
his mother's 85, and we hear many stories.
Streets weren't paved at the beginning.
What was your question, Art?
But if he could remember to compare some of his experiences as a...
Well,
You went back to your hometown.
yeah, I mean, a couple of years ago, we went back to Germany and visited where I grew up. But, you know, when you're 5, it's hard to remember everything and had so much happen during that time that,
The interesting thing, Art, is that there were a group of neighbors that were very close, and one of the girls was babysitting Sig
In Germany.
in Germany, and we went back and visited. Their parents were dead, who were my, but the sisters in the family, one of whom was his babysitter, was alive, and we went to their house. They insisted we stay there. It was unbelievable. They brought up from their cellar wine that was like 50 years old, just to celebrate the fact that we came back. My mother-in-law and one of the sisters had kept in correspondence for 52 years, and when they came to Chicago, I think one man and his wife, one of the sisters, came to Chicago to visit my mother-in-law maybe 20 years ago. So there's been a connection yet.
I was just wondering, because it was Ku Klux country, how they, I was comparing it, they probably didn't do anything in this town because of the Jews. They probably went against, and those are our Jews. They
well, the
probably
people
went
like
against.
Jews. I mean, the people appreciated what the Jews did for the community. So they,
I know.
But there was still Klan there. I mean,
I know, but it probably was the kind of clan that said, well, these are our Jews, they're okay, it's the others who are no
No,
good.
not according to
No,
that
no,
book.
no. Ask Sig, you have to tell him what happened to you as a child and your brother. It's interesting.
well, you tell me.
No, you know it.
I don't.
Nobody chased you down, nobody
Well,
called
I mean,
you
well, you always
names.
had that.
That happens to
That
everybody.
was part of growing up.
Yeah, so as a matter of fact, doesn't the book mention that they with the Masons, that many of the Klan, they found out that many of the Masons were Klan members,
Yeah,
and then Jews left in mass and
Joined
became
Elks.
Elks instead. And then the Masons subsequently, probably trying to make up for it, then elected a Jew into it as an officer.
Who was, how
My
many
uncle
Jew-
belonged to the Masons when he lived there. I remember that. But then he joined the Elks after a while.
How many Jewish
The Elks
mayors?
was very large there.
How many were Jewish mayors from the town?
I don't know, they probably had 5 or 6 Jewish mayors. In fact, there was, when I lived there was a fellow that, his name was Ben Glazer. He had an automobile dealership there. And he was a mayor for a while. And he was pretty well respected there. In fact, he owned about half the town system.
How were you went to a regular public school?
Yeah, that's all they had. They didn't have any.
Jim Golden, who was a mayor? Jim Golden. Jim Golden, I think, was a mayor at one time,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, these people lived in Ligonier. I knew some of the people. They were acquainted.
You know, Labor Day, they have a big to-do out there. And they changed it now from strawberry days to something else.
It's called
Did you enjoy living there?
Pardon?
Did you enjoy living there?
Oh, loved it.
You did?
Oh, bringing up 7 kids was perfect.
Yeah.
Every August, we have yet to go, but every August, they have a weekend where they call it Jewish reunion of all the graduates of Ligonier High School, and they have it every August.
They do.
Every August. I can show you in the book later where it is, but every year, if you write and tell them your address, I can give you
I know
several
my kids
people.
go for their year, but they graduated. But they have a general one?
Yes.
But they graduated
Just
from
for
Ligonier?
Jewish kids, though?
No.
About 5 of them did.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great town.
Yeah, it's a nice pace there. Slow pace. Yeah.
I wonder if anybody else knows of a community like Ligonier in either Indiana or Illinois that was so heavily influenced by Jewish merchants. Does anybody? Vincennes?
Yeah, but Vincennes was much larger Ligonier. I mean,
There's a cute story about Vincennes. First of all, the Jewish historian of Vincennes is an African-American woman who was a personnel person for the University of Vincennes. She was related and be destroyed. In the 1850s, this Jewish peddler landed in New Orleans, worked his way up the Mississippi to the Ohio River, and up the Ohio River to the Wabash River, and he came to Vincennes, he liked it, and he opened a business, a haberdashery store there, did extremely well. He decided to open a store in New York. So he sent the family to New York, and they did extremely well there. He died in Vincennes and was interred in Vincennes. The family thought this was wrong because they didn't have any family members left in Vincennes, so they disinterred and reinterred in New York. The gentleman's name was Mason.
Oh, really?
Can I maybe pass around a couple of things and explain? This was an article in the New York Times. I reduced it many times, but it was 1984, completely about Ligonier. Number 2, here's one of the homes that are bed and breakfast, and it tells the history. Number 3, this is the newspaper, the Ligonier Banner, with all the relatives and all the history of Ligonier. There's so much available. Anyone want to start it? I'll bring
Really
it
not
down.
that far drive from here. I think it would be very interesting.
I thought it's near Fort Wayne.
Well, Fort Wayne South.
Yeah.
This is great.
They know the same.
Yeah,
That was Wiley, that's the
One at a time.
Yeah.
It was probably a picture of the...
Excuse me.
Picture of the synagogue.
Yeah.
That was an Orthodox synagogue?
Well, when I was there, it was reformed.
Okay. Well, anyway, the interesting thing about the synagogue, if you look at the picture, is that it doesn't look like a synagogue, it looks like a church. It looks very, very Gothic looking. And I think it was probably in Charleston there, we were years ago, where this is one of the oldest
At Charleston,
synagogues
Illinois?
in North America.
Charleston, Illinois? Or
Charleston,
Carolina, South Carolina.
Oh.
Carolina, right. And at the time, we were told, when we went to visit this, we were told that the Jewish community wanted a synagogue, but there were no architects who were familiar with anything other than Christian churches, and therefore the architect made plans for the synagogue in the form of a church, and they still have that church. And I would imagine that the same thing might well have happened in Ligonier.
Probably,
When you
yeah.
look at the picture of this synagogue.
Yeah, when we came there in 1938, we had services there, and they had an organ, and it was probably, I don't know, 15, 20 people would come there for a service. That was about it. But it's a beautiful temple inside.
So there were no Orthodox Jews there at all, is that correct?
No.
Because these were German Jews who came. They were
Right.
all
This is the second temple. They had a smaller one before, but they were Orthodox at that time.
Oh, okay.
But then as years progressed, they thought, well, the temple's so small, they can't make a section for the women and a section for the men, so they kind of developed a reformed congregation.
One other question I'd like to raise about in the pamphlet there, something I've never seen before. There's a photograph of a headstone, an ancient headstone in the cemetery there, and it shows a hand with the index finger extended, and I've never seen that.
Is it like this?
No,
it's not that way. Not that way.
the usual thing that you see in a cemetery for colons or people who are canon,
This.
the finger of the blessing.
Yes.
But here's this picture here of a hand with the index finger extended. Does anybody have any idea what that means?
It's the amulet. The amulet.
Wants to go.
Oh, maybe.
Manny, Phil knows something about it.
What?
I gotta see it.
Oh, okay. Here it is, right over here.
He's busy recording.
Can I also mention there's a book that I'll send around called An Orphan in History.
You ever see that?
Paul Cowan likes Sig, the same ancestral line. He's on an even keel, wrote this book. He was the son of Luke Cowan, who used to be Luke Cohn. But if you trace our histories back, they both go back to the Strausses in Germany. And in here, in the chapter 14, he talks about going back to Ligonier. This young man was researching his roots. And I don't know how many of you are interested or what part of it, but there's one section that I thought was, he talks, I mean, he says the same thing Sig said. There were 300 Gentiles, mostly farmers, living in Ligonier when my great-grandfather, Frederick William Strauss, settled there in 1853. A year earlier, he arrived in New York from the Rhineland town of Laufersweiler. In Auburn, Indiana, he met the landsman, handwear store owner named Joseph Spiegel, who taught him some English and advised him to use it in Ligonier, where the railroad was to lay tracks. Though the Jews Americanized themselves in order to do business with the Gentiles, they continued to take their Jewish life very seriously. In the 1850s, before there were enough Jews to form a synagogue in Ligonier, they went to Auburn or Fort Wayne. But later on in the 1880s, in September of 1889, a Reformed temple came to Ligonier, and that Friday afternoon, according to that paper, the Ligonier Banner, the congregation's two oldest members carried the Torah scrolls through Ligonier streets in a procession with music by the Ligonier Band that included Jews and Gentiles alike. And, I mean, there's a lot in here.
That book's very interesting, but I'd like to know what a Jewish wasp is. It's in the book, I've never seen that before.
Well, because his family were the Spiegels, you know, who were the first people to come into Kenilworth.
Yes.
Do you know what WASP stands for?
Yeah.
Here's
They
the
were
relation.
considered lost, not by the people in town. It's an interesting book.
Yeah, I'd like to.
See, the question is, who moved to Kenilworth?
The
Spiegel. Spiegel family.
The Strausses married the Spiegels. Polly Strauss married Modi Spiegel, and of Spiegels, and they moved to Kenilworth, and that's where they took the temple's eternal light. It's now hanging in a temple in Kenilworth, the one that used to be in Ligonier.
But Spiegel.
Christian Science is the Spiegel.
Polly converted to Christian.
There's a temple in Kenilworth, a Jewish temple?
I'd like to follow up on a question of
It's in a home.
Marcia's. I'd like to follow up on a question of Marcia's in terms of your social interaction, if you will, with some other people around in surrounding communities. I always go on the assumption that there are Jews in just about everywhere, in smaller communities, not just in South Bend, Fort Wayne, and so on. Did you have some contacts at all? Were you aware?
Well, I went to South Bend.
Besides South Bend, even some of
In
the
the other
other
areas, there weren't, where we lived, there were quite a few little Amish communities, Topeka,
Yeah.
and towns like Millersburg. They're all either.
But you weren't aware of other Jewish families?
Not in those towns, no.
So South Bend was about how far away?
About 35 miles.
And
There were some in Goshen. Goshen was 18 miles from us, and there were some Jewish families there.
Did you?
We communicated with them. Yeah, we visited and things. In fact, some of them were competitors.
Like for a Seder, for a High Holy Days, of course, a Passover.
Well, we'd either have it with some people in Ligonier or some relatives from Chicago would come out.
You would go to Chicago?
Oh, no, they would, either way, if they
Oh,
come
okay.
here, we'd go there.
Okay.
Did the railroad ever come to town?
Louder.
Near
Does it affect any of the business?
Yeah. But I came there wasn't much.
How many times a week did you go into South Bend to study?
Once a week.
What did it take, about an hour or more each way?
I usually took a bus there.
Oh, they had a bus?
Yeah, a bus went from Fort Wayne to South Bend and stopped at Ligonier. So we take the bus over.
Did you know know that Ligonier is, the whole town is on the historical register?
Oh, sure.
The
whole
temple,
town.
and the temple too.
I mean, that town has a lot of history.
Because of the prominent.
No railroad.
Yeah. New York Central. No,
Repeat the question.
that New York Central Railroad came through there. In fact, well, that's the
Louder.
train. We came from New York on New York Central. We took a train to Ligonier. It's a surprising thing. It looked like 1,000 people were waiting for us to get off the train there. I mean, it was something to have, when we came over, you know, family coming from Germany, and they made quite a big issue out of it. We came there, you know. And, there were a lot of people there.
You came just before the war.
1938. Yeah, well, the things were happening in Germany then.
It was not before the war. There was a lot of problems there. They left Germany because of the problems in Germany, and it was not easy. His mother had to smuggle, and she smuggled her father-in-law, Sig's grandfather, on the ship, and he was already sick with diabetes and in a coma, and she did everything she could to hide it from the authorities, but they weren't going to leave his grandfather behind. He, his brother, his mother, father, uncle, and grandfather all came over, and by the time they got to New York, Ellis Island, the grandfather was pronounced dead, and they had to stop at Ellis Island.
Would you mind explaining how you can smuggle an adult person?
Well, it isn't smuggling, it's covering up the fact that he was sick.
He was very sick.
She covered it very well. She made excuses
They all
why.
have papers, that's what amazes me. You won't be able to get their papers
Sometimes it costs money to get the papers.
Can I tell you what his mother? His mother went, and she went into where the authority was to get it. She was afraid to have her husband go because they were picking up Jewish men, but at that year, 1938, they weren't bothering the Jewish women. And she went out and she did all kinds of maneuvering and bribed people and did all kinds of things, turned their money into Leica cameras, because that's what they could bring. They couldn't bring money. They only could bring $200 in cash, but she's a very smart woman. And she took all the money she could get and exchanged it to Leica cameras, and then traded them when they came
We
to
have
America.
stories in our families similar, but we also have relatives who spurned coming to this country with the Indians running around. It's incredible.
By 38, it was time to leave
Yeah.
Germany.
You know, people did incredible things to bring family members through. When we were at Ellis Island a few years ago, the story is that one little girl who was very sick and was checked off by the doctors, as you may have seen it if you've been at Ellis Island, was not allowed to come in, which meant her whole family would have to go into quarantine with her, and it was doubtful if they could get in. And they would put an X mark with chalk on their shoulder as they walked through the line. Well, the man, and they were desperate, the man behind her tapped the parent on the shoulder. He took the coat off the little girl and turned it inside out and put it back on her, and that's how she got into the country.
I will say that when I went to do my research at the National Archives and the Library of Congress, I finally, after a few years, I was able to find the ship's passenger list where Sig and his entire family was on. And interesting enough, there was an addendum. The ship's log was pages long. There were 600 crew members alone on the ship. But anyway, I got to the end, and there was a list called detained aliens, and they were all detained because of Sig's grandfather. They were on a special page because of that. The rest of them didn't have to stop at Ellis Island, only if you had sickness at that time, and you know, like the story of the eyes. Who was the
Glaucoma.
who?
No, glaucoma was one of the things.
Well, we want to thank Sig very much. For sharing your personal and your community's rich history with us. This is exactly what we're hoping to bring to our members and our guests. And as we said before, we invite all of us. Thank you very much. Did you want to say anything else, Henry?
Probably just, some people just come to hear something about a town they don't know about. I don't either.
Well,
there no other place like it?
well, they stopped at Auburn, and the fellow that had a store in Auburn sent him on to Ligonier. And I don't know if he did that just to get rid of him or
Competition.
Yeah, he didn't need any competition.
Okay, why don't we continue going around real quickly, just so I introduce yourself. If you don't have any Ligonier,
King of Indiana.
okay.
Well, we really have no.
Your name.
Oh, Gladys Winter, from Munster, Indiana. We
Ernest
really,
Winter.
that's how we got here. We saw, Arthur must have put it in our bulletin belonged to Beth Israel, a courtesy announcement.
Cleo, South.
Oh, that was very good because we got it 2 weeks ago and I saw it. And I said the three of us should go since we had been to Ligonier. And that's how we got here. You should put more of those courtesy announcements in Beth Israel.
And it sounds to me like maybe at some point Mike will want to talk about his family roots in Princeton. Can we get you to sign off now on that? For next year?
Yes.
Next year, okay. Ernie?
What's your name?
Ernie Winter, how did you get here, by car?
South dragged me here.
Sir?
I'm Dan Mendelson. We live in Park Forest, and I'm trying to do a family history on the Mendelssohns and the Siegels, which they came from Lithuania and Germany, and mostly lived in North Dakota and Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Okay, we'll see you at some more meetings then.
I'm sure there are.
Good. Well,
I'm Jean Yates and I'm from Homewood. And I don't have a connection from Ligonier except through Ellen and Sig, and I've been there twice. And it's very interesting, and I suggest that you do go there. It's quite an interesting little town.
how did you learn about today's program?
In the Star.
In the Star, sir.
I'm Manny Chudwin, my wife Carol, and we learned about it through the Temple Bulletin. But I had to call Sig this morning because I wasn't sure exactly where it was going to be, and I forgot where I read about it. But in retrospect, it must have been through the
Which
Temple
Temple
Bulletin.
Bulletin?
This temple.
It's
This
Temple.
Temple.
However, I think Sig's story is fascinating, and it reflects a story, I think, of many of our parents and things. My father was probably 15 years old when he immigrated from Russia to Marinette, Wisconsin in 1903. And his story was fascinating, but he didn't come here today to hear that story.
But maybe at another time, though. Maybe at another time you can.
We are former members of the genealogy group, but because we're away a lot, we have discontinued our membership. But I'm intrigued today, and we're going to join.
Great.
I'm Sylvia Goddison, and I saw it in the paper.
In the Star? In the Star?
I'm Doris Schwartz and live in Park Forest.
And how did you learn about the meeting? Through
I saw it in the paper.
In the Star?
And I followed it
Good.
because my family came from out western in 1910.
Mount Western Canada? Western Canada. Or-
Myrna Ox.
Oh, okay, well,
Your name's in there too, and
Gladys's grandfather was the last kosher butcher in South Bend.
Ligonier, people buried in Ligonier.
okay, we're still going around the table.
there? Oh, several of them.
Philip Britt, member.
Doing a little family history?
A little.
Families from where?
Well, mother born here, father born in Lithuania.
Mother's parents born in?
Germany.
I'm Arthur Myers, and do a little family history, and even more interesting in a way than my own family history is Marsha's family history, which she'll be talking about to some extent in February at the meeting.
Fred folks also belong to this assembly.
Fred presented the program in November, and in an upcoming issue of our newsletter will be Fred's fascinating story from Germany, growing up in Germany.
It's available on cassette for $10.
Well, they were successful.
No
Marilyn,
commercials.
a little bit.
Marilyn Lichtenstein, I'm the one that's been bothering you to get your name.
And where your family is from?
My mother from Louisville, Kentucky, and my father from Lithuania,
And you were born in
Kentucky.
where?
I was born in Louisville, but I came to where we lived in Madisonville when I was, after I was born.
I saw the notice in the newspaper.
Your name is?
I'm Bernice Ginsburg from Chicago Heights.
Chicago Heights.
My niece met a young man at Indiana U whose name is Max Golden. And they ultimately got engaged. And with a name like Max Golden, one would assume this is a Jewish man.
Closer to the fire.
Turns out that even though he knew some words, he was not Jewish. Nobody else in the town was Jewish. But this lady, Mrs. Griffith, said one of the mayors was named Jim Golden. Max's father's name at one time was Jim Golden.
Okay.
So I'm about to pass this information on to
Great.
them.
Okay.
And I think they'll be pleased to hear it.
Very good. Now, we have articles on Ligonier in our temple, in our society library that Ellen can tell you about. Marcia?
Oh, hi. I'm Marcia Myers. And
What's your middle name? What's your maiden name?
Indiana. But, okay, let's see, this was especially fascinating, Ligonier, because many years ago, Arthur and I happened upon Ligonier. And we happened upon it because at that time we had kind of a neat experience. We lived in Muncie, Indiana for 6 years, which gave us the small town feeling and kind of know what it was like. But to us, it was a very good feeling because as someone said who belonged to the congregation there, and we did, hey, it's the only game in town. And so, you know, we always had a real good feeling about Muncie and Ligonier. We visited Ligonier in the early 80s.
And your middle name is? I mean, your maiden name.
Indiana.
Her maiden name is really Indiana. With an E-R at the end.
But that's a February.
That's a February program.
I found out where that name came from.
Indiana?
Because people in Germany in that area, they were called Indiana when they were really wild people.
Oh.
Because they figured they called the American Indians Indiana.
Ellen?
I thought they were Michigan.
Ellen Kagan, I was born in Germany, my parents were born in Germany, and all ancestors were born in Germany.
And you came over at how old?
Well, why don't you just ask me how old I am? I came over at the end of 38 and I was?
6 months.
5. Thank you. By the way, to the Mendelssohns,
Yeah.
let's talk. I've got a Mendelssohn.
Okay. And then Ruth and Lottie,
What?
tell us
I wasn't listening.
Tell us
who you are.
where you
talking.
where you from. Go ahead.
We're from Germany,
When did you come to this country?
1939. I come from Germany, southern Germany, on the Rhine. What's the name of the town? The name is Karlsruhe. Get away with this thing.
Big city.
That's why I came in 1955
Lottie Buxbaum.
from Israel, Germany, Israel, and then here. We lived in Germany in 1934 from Berlin.
You went from Germany in 34 to Palestine
That's right.
directly?
Yeah, more or less.
More or less.
Then we came here in 55.
You're
And
next.
There's a gentleman in the corner. I didn't get your name.
Sal Yates, and I immigrated from Chicago,
Your ancestors.
from Russia, before me. Mother and father both born in Russia.
Okay. How did you learn about today's program?
He's a
From
friend.
Ellen Kahn.
Oh, okay.
They brought their own cheering section.
She's my social secretary.
Ah. Okay, Ellen.
He's our accountant. I think Henry should talk.
Okay.
My name is Henry Landauer. I came from Germany also in 1938. And recently, I just want to mention that to anybody that did come over from Europe in that time span, anytime from 34 to later on, there is a Spielberg Foundation who is trying to keep a record of people that came at that time. And you don't have to come in through a concentration camp or anything like that, but they want to historically identify the people that came and the different experiences they had. And I had recently, they taped about 2 hours of my history, and I think some people are very, including my wife, who don't want to do it. For some reason they're afraid of the camera or something like that, but I think it's a great thing for your children or your grandchildren to have eventually, because they may be sitting here 50 years from now and discussing the same thing.
Right.
And then they say, why didn't we ask them? Because we don't know.
Like the name Golden, and not to know, the background of the family. So we didn't ask questions. And finally, there's a lady over there, we didn't ask her name.
Oh, Norman Anderhouse, and I'm from Chicago too. And my ancestry, my parents were from Russia and Lithuania, although my father always said he wasn't quite sure whether it was Lithuania or Russia.
Have you done a little bit of family research?
I have a cousin in LA who's taking care of the matter.
That doesn't count.
I get no.
Good. How did you learn about today's program?
Well, Marilyn twisted my arm.
Good.
Gently. And then I was talking to Myrna today,
Good.
who actually.
Good.
I thought I won't tell her.
Very good.
Hey, don't give me any credit at
my
all.
own handwriting on the calendar.
Okay. And finally, the lady who is sort of like made today's program possible in many ways, and is one of the godmothers of the society.
Founders.
Founding president.
Ellen Kahn. What's your maiden name? Not your middle name. Maiden.
Lucas, also Germany. Everyone on all 4 sides of our family came from Germany, and we've been able to trace it back to the early 1600s, only because the Germans kept meticulous records, and some of the towns, like where my mother came from, Schwäbisch Hall, they are now inviting the Jews who had to flee back there, and our family has been fortunate. We've been invited twice back there, and Sig was invited once from near his hometown, the large city of Trier. Not all cities are doing this for German Jews, but when you do correspond with Germany, there is a great deal of help you can get, because they did keep very, very meticulous records. And I'll be seeing Roz Greenberg next week in California.
Well, we want to thank you all for sharing with everyone, and we heard from what you said that there's a couple of more potential programs here. So we want you to come back to enjoy the upcoming programs, and thank you again.
Can I mention one thing? You mentioned Sal Rosner. I don't know what month he's coming.
March.
Sal is married to my first cousin, and more than Czechoslovakia, Sal has even a greater story to tell about the Holocaust, because it happened during his teens, and he never spoke about it, although he's been a member of our family for 35 years.
Right.
Just recently is he speaking to schools and everything,
Right.
and it's going to be a fascinating program.
Yeah, well, today's program was just terrific. Thank you again, Sig.
We keep the library open if you want to look at anything.
Board members, please stay. Board members, please.